Hello, everyone, and welcome tonight. It is Sunday night, August 27th, 2023. I welcome you and thank you for joining me. My name is Glenn Rawson, and tonight I'm coming to you from a hotel room in Belfast, Northern Ireland. I am we're staying at the Temple Patrick Hilton, right on the golf course here just outside of Belfast. We've had a wonderful day. Yesterday touring Dublin and today touring Belfast and the Titanic Museum. So it's a great day. And I have to say, next year in August, on the 27th of August, I am coming back here for a land tour. And there's going to be some special surprises in that tour a year ago that we're putting together right now. And that's the only tour next year that I still have openings for. If you would like to come with me to the British Isles, you are invited. And over the next couple of days, well, tomorrow, actually, I'm going to Giant's Causeway. And I will shoot a Facebook Live when I'm there and show you what that beautiful scenery looks like. So that's coming up tomorrow. If you would like to come with me to the British Isles, go to funforlesstours.com and I would invite you to come. For tonight, thank you for being here. And as always, please have a prayer in your heart for me and those who may be listening. My stories tonight, with the exception of one, all have an English basis to them. So I hope there's something here that edifies you. And indeed, I thank you for joining me. And I have a prayer in my heart for you. I hope something I say tonight will be a benefit to you. First story for tonight. Nora was born October 6th, 1796, at Peel on the Isle of Man. Her father was the captain of a slave trading ship, the Helen. Nora grew up with a good education and a proper upbringing, becoming a well-refined and educated young woman. When she was just 14, her father was killed at sea and putting down a mutiny, and Nora's mother was left to support the family. Well, Nora left home to help with that and to find work. She found employment at the house of Governor Smelt, the governor of the Isle of Man. And there she came into association with many important people. She became good friends with a young woman who was married to the secretary of the newly appointed governor of Canada, Lord Elmer. Well, when the governor left for Canada, Nora's friend invited her to go along as well. At first, Nora refused, but as she was wont to do when such a serious question came before her, she prayed and asked the Lord to help her find answers in her Bible. So, while praying, Nora opened up her Bible at random, and her eyes landed on this verse. It said, quote, "Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house into a land which I will show thee." Genesis 12:1. Well, Nora took that as a sign and became convinced that the Lord wanted her to go to Canada. So, May 1832, Nora left for Canada. She settled in Toronto. Once there, Nora renewed her associations with those she had known before in the old country, the Methodists. And with that renewal of acquaintance, she became acquainted with a young man she did not know before. His name was John. He too was an immigrant from England. John was a Methodist lay preacher and a very devout individual. Both Nora and John were seekers, and in time, they became friends. Well, at that time, as their friendship deepened, John shared with Nora a revelation from his youth through which he had come to know that he would preach the gospel in America, and it was a message of import and power greater than any he had ever known before. How was this to be fulfilled? John had no idea. Well, as her class leader, Sunday school teacher, if you will, John soon found himself attracted to the slender, dark-haired Nora, who at 36 was mature accomplished, charming, witty, and possessed of all the attainments of a woman, a lady of culture. It was B.H. Roberts who would later describe Nora as, quote, refined both by nature and education, gentle and ladylike in manner, witty, intelligent, gifted with rare conversational powers, possessed of a deep religious sentiment, and withal remarkable for the beauty of her person, end of quote. Well, John began to court Nora, but Nora wasn't interested. She, quote, she thought him handsome, but unpolished. He hadn't been to the right schools nor attended a university. His intellectualism was flawed by gaps of the self-educated. Beneath the charm and humor crouched the tiger, she said. He was a man, she thought, who would always be involved in battles for principle. Did she want such a life? She wasn't sure. Notwithstanding her reluctance, John proposed anyway. She turned him down. There were other reasons for her coolness, not the least of which, Nora was 36 years old. John was 24. Nevertheless, John was persistent. That would come out in his character later in life, asking the Almighty to intervene with Nora on his behalf. And then Nora experienced a dream in which she saw herself as John's wife and happy. She took it as a revelation from the Almighty, and when John asked again, Nora accepted. They were married January 29th, 1833. Little could Nora have known that the man that she married that day would become himself every bit as much a prophet as those she cherished in her Bible. A man renowned for his courage and his intellect, who indeed would stand for principle like a tiger, like a lion of the Lord. And for those principles, John would be wounded at Carthage in 1844 and die in exile in 1887 for his faith. John and Leonora Taylor. Next story. It is generally not appropriate, at least for me, to speak ill of the dead, but perhaps this man was lifted up and meant to be an exception to that rule. Korihor was a fool, a stubborn fool. Alma chapter 30 is Mormon's account of the rise and fall of Korahor, the Antichrist, in the Book of Mormon. You'll recall that he went throughout the land, denying the existence of God and preaching against the commandments of God, mocking the leaders of the church and denying the prophecies of the coming of Jesus Christ, teaching the people to embrace their lifestyle and their sins and lift up their heads and be proud of how different they were. Well, Korahor had considerable success with that kind of preaching, and he led many people astray to commit many whoredoms. That is, until he came into the land of Jershon among that people called the anti-Nephi Lehis. They kicked him out of the land. From there, he went to Gideon, where he was arrested and brought before the chief judge and the high priest of that land. When they listened to him, they wouldn't even answer him. They sent him to Alma, the prophet. Not daunted in the least, Korahor rose up in great swelling words before Alma, and he didn't get very far into his tirade before Alma cut him off cleanly and took total command of the conversation and threw Korahor back on the defensive. The tone of Alma's words in Alma 30 seem almost indignant, as if he's angry at Korahor's brazen lies and his his impudence at saying such things. Alma asked him pointedly, "Believest thou that there's a God?" And Korihor answered, "Nay." But Alma said unto him, "Will you deny again that there's a God, and also deny the Christ?" Ooh. Korihor had no idea who he was dealing with. At this point, Korihor should have been scared out of his wits and ready to repent. But instead, he pushed on, demanding a sign, to which Alma responded to him by saying, "Thou hast had signs enough. Will you tempt your God? Will you say, 'Show unto me a sign,' when you have the testimony of all these thy brethren, and also all the holy prophets? The scriptures are laid before thee, and all things denote that there is a God, yea, even the earth and all things that are upon the face of it, and its motion, yea, and also all the planets which move in their regular form do witness that there is a supreme creator. And yet, do ye go about leading away the hearts of this people, testifying unto them that there is no God, and yet will you deny against all these witnesses?" And Korihor said, "Yea, I will deny except ye show me a sign." That was it. That finished Korihor's opportunities and chances. He asked for a sign. He received the sign, as Alma declared it. He was struck deaf and dumb by the Almighty, irrevocably, and cast out. Korihor then acknowledged his error, but now it was too late. He fell from his fleeting glory, lost all of his friends in his wickedness, and was forced to go about begging for food for his survival. His final end was to be trampled to death, run upon and trampled to death among people who had once believed as he did, the Zoramites. Now, my friends, look carefully at Korihor. He asked for signs to prove the existence of God, and Alma cites the following as proof, and I emphasize that word, proof, to Korihor that there is a God and is Christ. Number one, the witness and testimony of Korihor's living brethren in his own day. Proof. That proves it. Number two, the witness and testimony of prophets of the past as recorded in Scripture. Proof that there's a God. And number three, the order and beauty of all nature is a witness that God is real and he lives. Proof again. And Korihor boldly and foolishly rejects and denies all those witnesses. The utterly blind arrogance of declaring hundreds, thousands, millions of witnesses, all liars, dupes, and fools, just to stand up for his own arrogance. Oh, today, my dear friends, and every time I'm out, there are too many now who deny outright, just like Korihor did, the reality of the living Christ, the truth of his restored gospel, the divinity of the calling of Joseph Smith the prophet. They are making the same mistake as Korihor in the same way. They ignore, slight, or defame the witness and character of those living and dead who know the truth for themselves and declare it. It is, I assure you, then and now, a deadly and dangerous course to deny living and past witnesses. May they awaken and repent before it is too late. I assure you, there will come a day of judgment, and those witnesses cannot be ignored. Next story. Emily was born in England in 1836. She grew up with an unusual interest in God. She said, "I was much concerned about my eternal salvation and felt I would make any sacrifice to obtain it." She asked lots of questions, but no one could help her. She found answers and comfort in the Holy Scriptures. Interestingly enough, the prophet who most fed her soul was Isaiah. A very unusual girl. She said, "I was never weary of reading his prophecies. The glory of a latter-day Zion that he spoke of burdened his inspirations and possessed for me a charm irresistible." End of quote. Then when Emily was 12, a cousin invited her to come to her new church. No one in the family was willing to go. One of the sisters volunteered Emily, "Yeah, send Em, she'll tell us all about it." And so Emily went with her cousin and witnessed the gifts and power of the Spirit poured out in a way that she had never seen before. And Emily was converted. It was indeed as though I had been brought out of darkness into marvelous light, and I could not shut my eyes against it, she said. However, when she went home and announced that she was getting baptized, not only was that privilege denied, but ever after that, Emily was closely watched lest she should be led away by that sect that everyone was speaking against. 4 years this went on, where Emily is virtually under house arrest. Then in time, her older sister Julia found the church and the faith, and the two of them, both Emily and Julia, got baptized. But immigrating to Zion, coming to America, that was out of the question. She was given a blessing, however, that one day Emily would be enabled, indeed, empowered and inspired to write prose and verse that would comfort the hearts of thousands. In May 1856, Emily and Julia ran away from home to board the ship Thornton, bound for America. And in July 1856, Iowa City, Iowa, Emily and Julia became part of the Willie Handcart Company. And as you know, it was a hard journey. These two soft English girls wondered how they would ever make it. In fact, Emily finally had to say, "I'll put one foot in front of another until I either make it to Zion or I die along the way." And she did. She pulled, along with Julia, that loaded handcart more than 1,000 miles and never rode a step until after Rocky Ridge. And then, Sunday, October 19th, 1856, right around noon, howling winter storms on track caught the Willie Company on one of the most exposed portions of the trail, near the 5th crossing of the Sweetwater. The Willie Company was completely out of food, and they were almost 300 miles from Salt Lake City. And then 3 men on the same day rode into camp announcing that rescue wagons and supplies were just a couple days ahead. As those rescue advanced riders were preparing to ride out, one of them, Joseph A. Young, looked down and saw in the snow someone he recognized, Emily Hill, and he burst into tears. "Why do you cry, Brother Young?" she asked. "Oh, because you look so starved, and those wagons are miles away." And with that, Joseph A. gave her the only thing he could. He handed her an onion. Emily didn't eat it. She kept it in her pocket. Later on that night, she saw a man before the fire who appeared to be dying. she gave the onion to him. He would later say that onion saved his life. Emily and Julia made it to the valley, and in time, both of them got married. Then, when Emily had one child, her husband went on a mission to England, leaving her to fend for herself. 4 years later, her husband wrote back announcing he was not coming home. He wanted nothing to do with her, nothing to do with the church. Significantly, Emily said, quote, "All that I had hitherto suffered seemed like child's play compared to being deserted by one in whom I had chosen to place the utmost confidence." End of quote. It was now the winter of 1863-64. The Civil War had driven prices up. Survival was difficult, even in Utah. Emily's house was sold right out from under her. And one night when Emily was so weary with overwork, anxiety, wondering what she was going to do, words came into her mind as clear as if audibly spoken. They said, "Trust in God and in thyself." Emily got up and penned her heart in promised poetry. And then she got up and went to work. In time, Emily would remarry. She would bear 8 more children. And by the things which she suffered, she became gifted in business, cheerful in nature, a champion of women's rights, and one of Zion's great poets. Now, you may not know Emily by her name, but this English girl come to America, Emily Hill Mills Woodmansee, you may not know that name, but the sisters will surely recognize these words that she paid such a price to know and write. As sisters in Zion, we'll all work together. And so I hope it is now. Let's take a break. Are you okay? I hope you're doing well. Coming up, starting on September 14th, I'm going to be doing a series of one-day tours. One of them will be to Cache Valley. One of them will be in the Salt Lake Valley. There'll be another one that'll take 3 days. We'll go down through St. George and back up through the San Pete. And another tour will be the Fall Colors Tour, which will go on up through Idaho and into Jackson and then back down through Star Valley. All the while visiting sacred sites, cemeteries, and telling stories about these wonderful pioneers who settled the beautiful land of the Rocky Mountains. That is available from GlennRawsonStories.com. If you want more information, I would really like you to come. Those tours have been well received, and they're a lot of fun. And they're very inexpensive and quick for those of you that are on a tight budget and those of you that don't have a lot of time. Come with me. Get a taste of what it's like. All right. Once again, for listening to these firesides, thank you for the honor of allowing me to be here. And for those of you that have already signed up to receive these stories every week, please refer a friend. But those of you that are already here, thank you. I am very grateful. All I want more than anything is to share the gospel and bring souls unto Christ. And if you'll help me with that, I would be very grateful. Charles was born in Ireland of Scotch, Irish, parents, probably an Ulster Scot, and probably right near where I'm at right now in Belfast, Northern Ireland. When he was about 10 years of age, his mother passed away. And shortly after that, his father set sail for America, taking Charles and his brothers. When they were within sight of the Capes of Delaware, Charles's father died from the effects of seasickness and was buried at sea. The penniless brothers came ashore in America with nothing and were left to their own resources. It is said that young Charles was approached by a woman who asked him what he wanted to be in his future. And Charles replied, "A scholar. I want to make my way with my mind and pen." End of quote. The woman was so impressed with such an answer from such a young man that she took the boy and arranged for his education with one of the finest educators of his time, Dr. Francis Allen. And Charles soon proved himself a very worthy student. He found himself, Charles, charmed with the Greek language, and soon he mastered Greek. It was suggested to him as a natural follow-up that he study theology. Charles asked an interesting question. Where is it and how is it that these scholars of theology learned what they knew? And he was told, well, they learned it from the Bible. "Well then," replied Charles, "if they whom you so highly recommend as models drew their religious instruction from the scriptures, I shall apply directly to the same source instead of taking knowledge at second hand." End of quote. And I highly recommend to you, as I've said so many times, when it comes to studying the scriptures, who needs scholars and who needs commentaries? Go directly to the source. Why drink downstream below the cows? And so Charles did. Though he had no intention of becoming a minister, he studied the scriptures for the rest of his life, developing a very intimate knowledge of the Bible. Charles chose a career and served his nation with great distinction. He became highly respected with a reputation for honor and integrity. A common statement of his day in public service was, something was as true as if Charles Thompson's name was put to it. End of quote. When he retired from public service, United States President George Washington wrote the following to him, quote, "Posterity will find your name so honorably connected with the unification of such a multitude of astonishing facts. Your services have been as important as your patriotism was distinguished." End of quote. Well, once Charles retired, he began a project he had wanted to do for a long time. It would take him the next 19 years of his life. And finally, in 1808, Charles Thompson gave to the world the first American translation of the Bible into English, and he did it all alone. Remarkably, it was also the very first translation of the Greek Septuagint into the English language. Of his work, this translation of the Bible, Charles Thompson wrote, quote, "I have sought for truth with the utmost ingenuity and endeavored to give a just and true representation of the sense and meaning of the sacred scriptures. And in doing this, I have further endeavored to convey into the translation as far as I could the spirit and manner of the authors, and thereby give it the quality of an original." End of quote. It's altogether fitting that Charles Thompson be remembered, though most Americans will remember him not as a Bible translator, but as one of the first two original signers of the Declaration of Independence, him and John Hancock, as the first man in American history to read the Declaration of Independence aloud, and as the only man to serve as the Secretary of the Continental Congress for the 15 years of its momentous existence, as the lone patriot who knew the history of America's founding better than any other individual, and Charles Thompson, as the man who designed the Great Seal of the United States. It was late in the evening of March 26th, 1603, when King James VI of Scotland received word that he had been chosen as the rightful King of England, beginning for him a fateful 6-week journey from Edinburgh to London. Now, he was to inherit the throne of a nation, England, rife with religious tension. Catholics and Protestants both vied for James's sympathies, and with good reason. James was a Protestant, but his mother had been a devout Catholic. And not only that, within the Church of England was a powerful reform movement, eager also to get the king's ear. Along the journey, a petition of religious grievances was given to the king and said to be signed by 100 Puritan ministers. Prudently, James gave no immediate answer, but called for a conference to be held at Hampton Court Palace in January of 1604 to consider all that had been asked of him. It is said that the Puritans received little satisfaction from the king. Clearly, James was on the side of the Church of England. However, one Protestant minister, a man described as a prodigy in ready, a living library and walking museum, John Reynolds, asked of the king only one translation of the Bible, and that to be declared authentic and read in the church. That request stuck with the king. He caught hold of that idea and ordered that this was to be done by the best learned in both universities, Cambridge and Oxford. 80 years of English translations were, by his order, to be brought together into one, and out of that was to come one Bible, the best of them all. On June 30th, 1604, 47 translators had been appointed. They were to be divided into 6 companies and assigned different portions of the Old and New Testaments and the Apocrypha. King James and his chief advisor to the project, Richard Bancroft, drew up 15 strict rules to be diligently complied with in the translation process. The translators were to compare the existing English translations of the Bible, of which there were several, with the ancient Hebrew, Greek, and Greek manuscripts, and then they were to select that language as consonant as can be to the original Greek and Hebrew. End of quote. Moreover, when any translator finished his assigned portion, he would submit that to the other members of his company for their review. Humility and faithfulness were to be a standard for the translators. They were to be secretaries of the Almighty, not authors. And if there was disagreement, the scholars were to work until there was unanimity. Then the company would submit their work to the other 5 companies for review. The finished work was then to be sent to a general committee of review. Well, with all those rules, the translators began in the fall of 1604. It took them 3 years before they were ready to convene the General Committee of Review. King James himself was a poet and a man of words. He was obsessed with books and desired a Bible for all of his people, an open Bible with no marginal interpretive footnotes to restrict his people's understanding. He wanted a Bible to be read in church so majestic in its language and so filled with dignity that his people would recognize it as the Master's voice when they heard it. It took more than 3 years before the General Committee was selected and had completed their work of review and revision. By 1610, it was ready to be printed. Nothing was left to chance. It was as perfect and precise as it could be. It was first printed in 1611 by Robert Barker, the king's printer. One of history's ironies is that the King James translators would borrow 75 to 80% of the language in their Bible from William Tyndale. They borrowed his translation, all the while remaining suspicious of Tyndale himself. That Bible was intended only to be read in churches, but public demand for that Bible would eventually require smaller, more affordable translations of the book to be sent out to the public. And lastly, as a bit of irony, it was those same English Puritans fleeing religious persecution under King James who brought that Bible, his Bible, to America, where a young lad by the name of Joseph Smith would read this unique passage from the King James. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God that giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. And it would be that same young man who would maintain most of the beautiful work done by the King James translators, and by the inspiration and revelation of heaven would improve upon their Bible, thus to make it the most important and the most accurate Bible of any on earth, the Joseph Smith translation. Last story for tonight. As a young man, William was born in 1725 to a life of privilege in Yorkshire, England. He was the son of a wealthy merchant father. At the age of 9, William was sent to live with an aunt and uncle who were part of an evangelical movement in the Church of England. The spirit of their nonconformist teachings and influence affected young William, and he became deeply religious. However, this alarmed William's mother and grandparents, and though William adored his aunt and uncle, he was removed from their home and returned to Yorkshire. And in time, all of those convictions that he had, well, they went away. In October 1776, William enrolled in Cambridge, where he pursued his social life first and his studies second. Drinking, gambling, and partying with friends made him extremely popular. Among the fast friends that William made was a dear friend named William Pitt. Pitt would go on to become Prime Minister of England. But with Pitt, William nurtured an interest in politics, and together the two of them sought election to the House of Commons. Both, indeed, were elected. At age 21, while still a student, William became a member of Parliament representing Kingston upon Hull. Well, in Parliament, William rose in prominence, determining early on in his life that he would stand independent of party and would vote his conscience. But at the same time, while doing so, he managed to endear himself to the people. He was described as the wittiest man in England. As a speaker, he was powerful. One writer said of William in Parliament, quote, "I saw what seemed a mere shrimp mount upon the table, but as I listened, he grew and grew until the shrimp became a whale. End of quote. And then, touring Europe in 1785, William felt impressed to study religion with a friend. He began rising early every morning to pray and read the scriptures. He became so converted, and so much so, that he considered resigning his seat in Parliament and becoming a minister. He sought the counsel from a trusted older friend, John Newton. And both William Pitt and Newton counseled William to stay in Parliament. Surely, they told him, the principles as well as the practice of Christianity are simple and lead not to meditation, but to action. In other words, stay where you are and do all the good you can. William remained in the House of Commons, the cause of Christ becoming William's cause himself. Over his career, he would be a part of more than 60 different philanthropic societies. Wilberforce was generous with his time and his money, believing that those with wealth had a duty to give a significant portion of their income to the needy. Yearly, William gave away thousands of pounds and much of it to clergymen to distribute in their parishes. He paid off the debts of others, supported education and missions, and in a year of food shortages, gave to charity more than his own yearly income. He was exceptionally hospitable and could not bear to sack any of his servants. As a result, his house was full of old and incompetent servants kept on in charity. From 1785 until his resignation from Parliament, he pressed for legislation to improve the moral, physical, and emotional well-being of his fellow men. It was not always popular. At times, he was slandered, vilified, and even attacked and beaten on the streets of London by a man opposed to his politics. Nevertheless, William pushed on year after year, seeking reform and the betterment of the lives of the people. And then, on the night of February 23rd, 1807, the speeches of the House of Commons turned from the legislation on the table to the man who had written it. They spoke in high tones of praise and honor of the life and service of their colleague, William. It was said that he would go down in history as the man who preserved life for millions. And suddenly, the House rose to its feet and burst forth in 3 cheers while William Wilberforce, bowed his head and wept. And then, by a vote of 283 to 16, they voted in favor of what had been William's passion, his life's work, the abolishment of the slave trade in the British Empire. And William didn't stop there. For the next 26 years, he lobbied nations at home and abroad, across the world, to outlaw slavery. And finally, on July 26, 1833, William was informed that the last obstacles had been overcome. Slavery was no more across the empire. July 29th, 1833, William Wilberforce passed away. So grateful were his countrymen that Wilberforce, the commoner, was buried in Westminster Abbey. Who can measure how much good one determined man or woman can actually do? Even you. From Belfast, Northern Ireland, good night. I love you. God bless.